Welcome to the Smart Weight Loss Coaching Podcast. I'm Dr. Lisa Oldson, a board-certified weight loss medicine specialist and certified life coach. In this podcast, I'll share fresh insights and effective techniques for incorporating mindset, habit change, and proven science into your life. Are you ready to achieve sustainable weight loss, wellness, and longevity? Then let's jump in and lose weight the smart way. Welcome back. My son is heading to college in the fall, and if you're a parent, you know that this is one of those moments that lands differently than you expected. You think you're ready, and then suddenly you're not so sure. But as I've been thinking about this transition and what it means for our family, my clinician brain keeps circling back to what does this mean for him? Not emotionally, although obviously I'm thinking about that too. I mean behaviorally. What is he going to eat? Is he going to sleep at a decent hour? Is he going to exercise? Or is he going to sit in his dorm room playing video games until 2 a.m. and living on pizza and chips? And of course, I wonder, will he floss his teeth often enough? Here's the thing. He might do all of those things, but he also might not. Because going to college is exactly the kind of major life change that, according to research, gives us a rare and genuine window to rebuild our habits almost from scratch. And that window is open, whether you're 18 years old or 50 years old. Whether you're moving across the country, starting a new job, watching your first child go off to kindergarten, going through a divorce, retiring, or watching your own kids leave home. Today's episode is about something researchers call the Habit Discontinuity Hypothesis. Rolls off the tongue, right? When you understand how it works, you'll never look at a major life transition the same way again. Let me start with a quick review of something we've covered before on this podcast, because it's the foundation for everything today. Habits are not just behaviors. They're behaviors that are tightly linked to context. A specific cue in a specific environment triggers a specific routine and delivers a reward. That loop, repeated over time, gets wired into the brain so efficiently that you don't have to think about it anymore. It just runs automatically, which is great when the habit is a good one. But here's the issue. Those automatic loops make habits extremely hard to change when you're still living in the same environment because the cues are everywhere. The couch where you always watch TV while eating a snack. The route home from work that passes right by the drive-thru. The evening routine that ends with the phone in your hand instead of on the charger on the other side of the room late at night. The context keeps triggering the old behavior, even if you'd prefer not to engage in that behavior, almost before you've had a chance to make a conscious choice. Dr. Wendy Wood, one of the leading habit researchers in the country, has described habits as context dependent. They don't live in your willpower, they live in your environment, which is why trying to change a habit while surrounded by all the same cues is so much harder than expected. Dr. Wood and researcher Bas Verplanken propose what they call the Habit Discontinuity Hypothesis. The idea is this. When a major life change disrupts your environment, it also disrupts the cues that trigger your old habits. And in that disruption, a window opens. A window during which your behavior is no longer automatic. You're back in deliberate decision-making mode. You're choosing consciously how to structure your day, what to eat, where to move your body, and when to sleep. The old routines haven't followed you into the new context yet. And that means new routines have a real chance to take root instead. They tested this in a field experiment with 800 participants, half of whom had recently relocated and half of whom hadn't. The people who had recently moved were significantly more likely to adopt new sustainable behaviors when given information about healthy choices than the people whose lives hadn't changed. Same information, very different uptake. The difference wasn't motivation or personality, it was the transition to a new home in a new location. Researchers studying university students found something similar. When students transferred to a new campus, their old habits, things like how often they exercised, how much TV they watched, how they ate, were significantly disrupted. Not because they decided to change these habits, because the context changed and the habits lost their triggers. Here's the part that I find most clinically interesting. This window doesn't stay open forever. Research suggests the period immediately following a major life change is when you're the most receptive to new information, most likely to make deliberate choices, and most likely to let those choices become the foundation of new habits. If you don't use the window, the old patterns tend to drift back in, or new ones take shape by default, often not the ones you would have chosen. There's a related concept from behavioral science called the fresh start effect, studied by Dr. Katie Milkman and her colleagues at the Wharton School. They looked at when people are most likely to make aspirational changes, things like starting a healthy diet, joining a gym, or committing to a new goal. And what they found was that people cluster these efforts around what they call temporal landmarks, the start of a new week, a new month, a new year, a birthday, a holiday. This might feel obvious to you, but it's important to call it out so you can tap into moments like this to create the change you're looking for. The reason this works psychologically is that these landmarks create a sense of separation from your past self. They give you a fresh start. Past failures feel like they belong to a different chapter, and you have a sense of permission to try again. Now, here's what I want you to lock in on. I want you to recognize that a major life transition is the most powerful temporal landmark there is. It's not just the first day of a new week or a new month, it's a new chapter of your life. The psychological distance from your old patterns is real, and the research says you can use it to create change. Let me walk through some of the transitions that are most common among the people in my practice and in my program, because the principle is the same, but the opportunity looks different depending on where you are in life. Let's start with going off to college. This is the one that's top of mind for me personally right now, and a lot of people I work with have teens and young adult children. The research on this transition is sobering. Studies consistently show that the freshman year of college is a high-risk period for weight gain, with somewhere around 60% of students gaining weight in their first year, at an average of over 7 pounds. The reasons are predictable. Dining hall food available around the clock, disrupted sleep from late nights and irregular schedules, less incidental movement than high school, access to alcohol, higher stress, and the complete disappearance of whatever structure home provided. It's a perfect storm for weight gain. But the window cuts both ways. The student who decides in those first weeks that they're going to use the campus gym, walk to class, eat a vegetable with every meal, and be in bed before midnight is working with that same open window. The habits that form in the first semester of college tend to stick, for better or for worse. So if your child is heading off to school, this conversation is worth having with them. Not as a lecture, but as a reframe. This is one of the most powerful opportunities to set the habits that will carry them for decades. How about starting a new job or changing careers? When you change jobs, almost everything that structured your day changes. What time you wake up, how you commute, where you eat lunch, when you exercise, and who you spend your time with. All of the environmental cues that were propping up your old habits are gone. The person who used to drive past a drive-thru on the way home might now walk past a farmer's market. The person who used to eat lunch at their desk might now have access to a cafeteria with different food options. A new job is a chance to build a new daily structure from the ground up. And the habits you layer into that structure in the first few weeks are the ones most likely to stick. What about moving to a new city? This is one of the clearest examples because the environmental change is so complete. You don't have the same grocery store, the same routes, the same restaurants on speed dial, the same social pressure to do what you've always done. Researchers found that people who recently moved were substantially more likely to adopt new healthy behaviors than people who hadn't. Whether you're moving for a job, a relationship, or a fresh start, the first months in a new city are a genuine opportunity to set up your environment intentionally. Find the farmer's market before you find the pizza place, and locate the nearest walking path before you locate the nearest bakery. Getting married. This one is interesting because the research shows a consistent pattern. People in relationships tend to gain weight over time compared to their single peers. Part of this is social, eating together, cooking for two, matching each other's habits. But the transition into marriage is also a moment when you're actively building shared routines. What do you eat together? Do you cook together? How do you spend your evenings? Does exercise have a place in your shared life? Do you take walks together? And so on. The habits built in the early years of a marriage become the infrastructure that's very hard to change later. Building them intentionally as a shared project is so much easier than trying to renegotiate them a decade in. Before we talk about other opportunities for creating healthy habits, let's hear a quick word from our sponsor. Just kidding. It's still me, Dr. Lisa Oldson, physician and founder of Weight Loss Strategy Lab. If you'd like to dive deeper into today's topic, we have a little something for you. Go to our website, smartweightlosscoaching.com, and under the podcast section, you'll find a link to a free worksheet that goes along with today's podcast episode. Simply click the button and we'll hook you up. And if you like that worksheet, you might also want to check out our full workbook that accompanies episodes 1 through 50 of the podcast. And we're back. Opportunities to create healthy habits aren't always positive experiences like starting college or getting married. For many people, divorce is an enormous life change. This one is harder to discuss as an opportunity because it is, for most people, one of the most painful experiences of their lives. And the research does show that divorce increases the risk of unhealthy behaviors, including more alcohol, disrupted sleep, and stress eating. But it is also, in the strictest behavioral science sense, a profound context change. The cues that held old habits in place are gone. Routines that were shared are now yours to redesign. Some of my clients who have gone through divorce describe it as the moment they finally started exercising consistently, or stopped drinking so much, or learned to cook, because the old triggers were gone and they had the chance, and in some cases the necessity, to build something new. I'm not romanticizing what's genuinely painful. I'm just saying the window of opportunity is there and it's worth knowing about. Let's shift back to a happier time in life, having babies. New parents are a special case because the transition is so all-consuming that most health habits simply collapse under the weight of sleep deprivation and total life reorganization. But research on this transition also shows that becoming a parent activates a powerful identity shift. Suddenly, you're someone with a reason to be healthy for the long term. Many parents report that having children was the catalyst that made them take their own health more seriously. Maybe not immediately, when they were barely keeping their head above water, but eventually. The question is whether you can use that identity shift, I take my health seriously for the sake of my kids, to build specific habits while the window is still open. The empty nest stage is the transition I see in my program more than almost any other. Kids launch, and suddenly the structure of your day changes completely. You're cooking for fewer people, or maybe just for yourself. The schedule that revolved around school and activities and carpools is gone. And many of my clients describe this moment as both disorienting and liberating. The disorientation is real, but so is the opportunity. This is often the first time in 20 years that an adult has the time and flexibility to actually prioritize their own health. I've seen more lasting behavior change come out of the empty nest phase than almost any other transition in adult life. And of course, there's retirement. The research here is nuanced. In the short term, retirement is often associated with increased physical activity because you finally have the time. You don't have to make the time, it's readily available. But studies also show that without intentional structure, activity levels do tend to drop again over the following years as the novelty of retirement wears off and a new, more sedentary default sets in. The window at retirement is wide open, my friends. What you do with it in the first year tends to predict what the next decade looks like. Now, I'd like to be honest about something because this episode wouldn't be complete without it. The habit discontinuity window cuts both ways. Just as good habits can be built more easily during a major transition, bad habits can take root just as quickly. The college student who defaults to late-night drinks or dining hall desserts, the newly divorced person who starts drinking a bottle of wine every night because the evenings are hard and the old structure is gone. The retiree who stops moving because there's no longer a reason to leave the house by a certain time. The research is clear that if you don't use your transition window intentionally, the environment will just fill it in for you and that window will close. Habits are going to form either way. The question is whether you're the one designing them. Here are 4 quick principles from the behavior science research. First, recognize that you are in a window of opportunity. This sounds simple, but it's actually the most important step. Most people experience a major life transition as something happening to them, and they try to get through it. Reframing it as a deliberate opportunity, even while it's hard, changes what's possible. Second, design your environment before the old habits drift back in. In the weeks immediately after a move, a new job, or another major transition, you have this rare chance to set up your physical space intentionally. Where does the fruit go? Where does the phone charge? What does your morning look like before the new routine calcifies? The behavioral science on environment design, which we discussed recently, applies here with particular force because the environment is a blank slate. Third, decide on 2 or 3 anchor habits and protect them. You don't need a complete overhaul, just 2 or 3 things that matter the most to you. Maybe it's a daily walk, a consistent bedtime, or cooking dinner at home most nights. These anchor habits become the structure around which everything else organizes. Research on habit formation consistently shows that trying to create more than 2 or 3 new habits at the same time tends to collapse under its own weight. And fourth, if you're in a painful transition, be especially deliberate about what you're reaching for comfort. Transitions that feel like loss, like divorce, retirement, kids leaving, or maybe losing your job, are exactly the moments when we're most likely to reach for food, alcohol, or other numbing behaviors to fill the space. Knowing this in advance gives you a chance to plan for it. You get to decide what you'll look for comfort that isn't going to cost you your health. That brings me to your NBA, your next best action. My NBA involves sharing this episode with my son, so he has time to set some intentional plans before heading off to college. Maybe you have someone in your life who could use a reminder that any transition is an opportunity to revamp our habits. If so, please share the link to today's episode. And if you're the one going through a big change, please remember that you can use this moment to your advantage to create habits that will help you live longer, healthier, and at your happy weight. Don't be afraid of change, my friends. You've got this. Thanks so much for listening. If you'd like more support during your smart weight loss journey, check out our group coaching program at smartweightlosscoaching.com. Until next time, stay well and stay smart.